Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're venturing into a really pivotal area of psychological study, schizophrenia.
Mm.
It's a condition that, well, it fundamentally alters how people experience reality,
Hmm.
impacts thoughts, perceptions, emotions, how they connect with others. It's complex.
Absolutely. And the material we're looking at today, it offers a pretty structured way into understanding it, especially, how psychologists approach it.
Yeah.
It's particularly relevant, say, for A-level psychology students tackling paper 3 for the June 2025 series. But honestly, anyone interested should find this valuable.
Exactly. So our mission today is basically to pull out the key information on diagnosis, the different explanations for why it happens, and the treatments.
Yep. Trying to make it clear and memorable.
Okay, so where do we start? Diagnosis seems like the logical place.
Mm.
How is schizophrenia actually diagnosed?
Well, current guidelines like the ICD-11, they stress it needs careful consideration. It's not just ticking boxes.
Yeah.
You need at least 2 specific symptoms present for over a month, and they have to be causing real problems, like in someone's social life or work.
Okay. And these symptoms, they often get grouped, don't they? Positive and negative symptoms.
That's right. It's a common distinction. Maybe we can break that down a bit.
Yeah, please do. What are positive symptoms?
So positive symptoms are generally things that are added to someone's experience or distortions of normal function.
Added, okay.
Yeah. Like delusions, these are really strong beliefs, but they aren't based in reality.
Okay.
Then you have hallucinations, sensory experiences like hearing voices, but there's nothing actually there causing it.
Got it.
Also, disorganized speech or thought disorder. Thoughts might jump around, speech becomes hard to follow.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, catatonic behavior. That's about unusual movement, could be staying completely still or maybe agitated movements.
Okay, so those are the added things. What about the negative symptoms then?
Right. Negative symptoms are more about a reduction or absence of typical functions, things that are taken away, sort of.
Like what?
Affective flattening is one. That's like a reduced range of emotional expression on their face or in their voice.
Okay. Less emotion showing.
Yeah. And alogia, that means poverty of speech. So speaking less or maybe less fluency.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's avolition. That's basically a lack of motivation or drive. Difficulty starting or keeping up with activities.
It sounds like it must present quite differently in different people.
Mm.
Is there much variation?
Oh, definitely. And the materials touch on this, the idea of case studies.
Right. Individual experiences.
Exactly. In practice, people often have a unique mix of these symptoms, positive and negative.
Yeah.
That's where the idiographic approach, focusing on the individual, becomes really important.
That focus on individual experience.
Right.
It links nicely to that Freeman study, doesn't it? The one using VR.
Ah, yes, Freeman et al. 2003. A fascinating study.
What were they trying to figure out? It was about delusions, right?
Specifically, persecutory delusions, those feelings of being watched, targeted, they wanted to study this in a controlled way.
And they used VR.
Yeah, they created a virtual reality simulation of a ride on the London Underground.
A VR tube ride.
Mhm.
That's pretty creative. What did they actually find?
Well, the key thing was individuals who already reported higher levels of persecutory thoughts in daily life, they were much more likely to see the neutral VR characters as threatening, even though these characters weren't programmed to be hostile at all.
Wow. So it wasn't the situation itself, but how they interpreted it.
Precisely. It strongly suggested that internal cognitive biases, how someone thinks and interprets things, might be really significant in keeping these delusions going, maybe more so than specific events outside.
And using VR, that must have helped control things.
Definitely a methodological strength. It minimized all those messy real-world factors you can't easily control. Let them see how different people perceive the exact same controlled environment.
That study really seems to touch on some big debates in psychology, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Like individual differences versus the situation itself.
And the whole idiographic versus noethetic thing again, is it about the person's unique makeup, or are there general principles about how situations trigger these feelings?
Right.
And then there's the question of generalizability or ecological validity, How well does feeling paranoid in VR actually reflect real-world paranoia?
Yeah, that classic research challenge. Control versus real-world messiness.
It's always a trade-off.
Okay, so we've covered diagnosis and that really interesting VR study on delusions. Let's shift gears now to the explanations behind schizophrenia. Biological and psychological views, right?
Yep. Let's maybe start with the biological side. Genetics is a big one.
Okay. The idea that it runs in families.
Well, there's strong evidence for a heritable component, yeah. Twin studies are often cited.
Ah, right. Identical versus non-identical twins.
Exactly. You see higher concordance rates, meaning both twins having the condition in identical MZ compared to non-identical DZ twins, suggests genes play a role.
But it's not just one schizophrenia gene, is it?
No, definitely not. It's considered polygenic, meaning many genes, each with a small effect, likely combine to increase someone's risk or susceptibility. It's complex.
Okay, genetics is one part. What else on the biological front? The dopamine hypothesis.
Yes, that's another major biological explanation. The core idea is that there's possibly overactivity of the neurotransmitter dopamine in certain brain pathways.
Like the mesolimbic pathway, I remember reading about that. Involved in reward.
That's the one often mentioned, yeah. Involved in reward motivation. The theory suggests too much dopamine activity there might contribute to symptoms, especially positive ones.
And the evidence. Does some of it come from how medications work?
A lot of it does, yes. Many traditional antipsychotic drugs work by blocking dopamine receptors, specifically the D2 type.
And they reduce symptoms.
They often reduce positive symptoms, which supports the hypothesis. But it's important to say it's probably more complicated than just dopamine. Other neurotransmitters like serotonin and glutamate are now thought to be involved too. It's an evolving picture.
Right, okay, so that's a snapshot of the biological side.
Yeah.
What about the psychological explanations? Cognitive models.
Yeah, the cognitive approach looks at problems in information processing, how people think, pay attention, interpret things.
Okay.
For instance, some research suggests people experiencing delusions might have a jumping to conclusions bias, meaning they form strong beliefs based on very little evidence. Quick to decide, perhaps?
I see.
Another key idea relates to hallucinations, especially auditory ones, like hearing voices.
Mm-hmm.
There might be a dysfunction in the central monitoring system. This is the cognitive system we think helps us distinguish between thoughts we generate ourselves internally and things coming from the outside world.
Okay. So if that's not working right.
The idea is someone might misattribute their own inner speech or thoughts as coming from an external source. They think they're hearing an outside voice when it's actually internal.
That's a really fascinating way to conceptualize it. The brain kind of tricking itself.
In a way, yeah. Misinterpreting its own signals.
And again, just like with biology in the VR study, these cognitive ideas connect back to those broader debates in psychology, right?
For sure. Nature versus nurture is huge here. How much is genes versus, say, faulty thinking patterns developed through experience?
Yeah.
And reductionism versus holism, are we explaining it just by looking at neurotransmitters or cognitive biases? Or do we need a bigger picture, integrating everything?
Mm-hmm.
Determinism versus free will comes up too. How much are people's experiences determined by these biological or cognitive factors?
Right.
And again, that idiographic versus nomothetic tension, understanding the individual's specific thought processes versus finding general cognitive models.
It really hammers home just how layered this condition is. You need multiple perspectives.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've looked at diagnosis and explanations. Let's talk treatment and management. What approaches are used? Biological first.
Right. Biologically, the mainstays are antipsychotic medications. We can sort of group them into typical and atypical.
Typical ones.
Like chlorpromazine? Exactly. Chlorpromazine is a classic example. These were developed first. They primarily work by blocking those D2 dopamine receptors we mentioned.
And are they effective?
They can be quite effective, particularly for positive symptoms, hallucinations, delusions, but they can come with significant side effects.
Such as?
Things like movement problems, sometimes quite severe, like tardive dyskinesia, also weight gain, sedation, things like that.
Okay. And the newer ones, the atypical antipsychotics, how are they different?
Atypicals, like clozapine or risperidone, tend to have a broader action. They often affect both dopamine and serotonin systems. The main advantage is often a lower risk of those severe motor side effects. And some evidence suggests they might be a bit better for negative symptoms too, though that varies. Clozapine, for instance, is often seen as very effective, but has its own serious side effect risks needing close monitoring.
It's a trade-off often. And what about ECT? Electroconvulsive therapy, is that still used?
It is, but much less commonly for schizophrenia now. It's usually reserved for very specific situations.
Right.
Like when someone is treatment resistant, meaning multiple medications haven't really helped, or if there's severe catatonia, or perhaps very high suicide risk alongside psychosis, it can be beneficial in those tough cases, but it's definitely not a routine treatment.
Okay, got it. So that covers the main biological treatments. What about psychological therapies? CBT comes up a lot, right? CBTP.
Yes, cognitive behavioral therapy adapted for psychosis, or CBTP, it's become a really important psychological approach. And there's that key study by Sinsky and colleagues from 2000.
Right, Sensky et al. What did they look at specifically?
They compared CBTP plus routine care versus just routine care alone, specifically for people with treatment-resistant schizophrenia, so people who weren't getting much better with medication.
And what was the outcome? Did CBTP help these individuals?
It did, significantly. They found that the group who got CBTP showed lasting improvements, not just in positive symptoms, but negative ones too, and in overall functioning. And these improvements were maintained even at a 9-month follow-up.
Wow, lasting improvements, even in treatment-resistant cases.
Uh-huh.
That's quite powerful.
It really highlighted the value of adding psychological therapy, yeah.
So what does CBTP actually do? What happens in therapy?
Well, it's collaborative. The therapist works with the person. Key aims often include helping them understand their experiences, challenging distressing beliefs or delusional thoughts in a gentle, exploratory way, developing coping strategies for hallucinations or difficult thoughts, and sometimes using behavioral experiments to sort of test out certain beliefs in the real world. It's about reducing distress and improving functioning, not necessarily eliminating all symptoms.
It sounds much more tailored and active than just medication alone.
It is. It focuses on the individual's specific experiences and interpretations.
And just like with causes, researching treatments must have its own challenges and considerations, ethical ones maybe.
Oh, absolutely. Ethics are paramount, especially around informed consent when someone might be experiencing significant cognitive difficulties or psychosis.
Yeah.
Methodologically, you need good research designs. Longitudinal studies, like Sensky's follow-up, are vital to see if effects last. Controlled experiments help establish if the treatment causes the improvement. And again, there's that tension, the value of personalized CBTP versus standardized medication protocols. How do you best research and combine those?
Lots to think about there. Okay, we have covered a lot of ground today on schizophrenia. Maybe we should try and summarize the key points.
Good idea. So we started with the complexity of schizophrenia, how it affects thoughts, feelings, perceptions, behavior.
And diagnosis requires specific symptoms present for a duration, causing dysfunction. We split these into positives.
Like delusions, hallucinations, added experiences.
And negative symptoms.
Like affective flattening, alogia, avolition, things missing or reduced.
Then the Freeman VR study showed how cognitive biases might contribute to persecutory delusions. Really interesting use of tech there.
Yeah. Then explanations. Biologically, we talked genetics, polygenic risk, and the dopamine hypothesis, though acknowledging it's more complex now.
And psychologically, the cognitive approach focused on faulty information processing, like jumping to conclusions, and potential issues with the central monitoring system for hallucinations.
Right. Then treatments. Biological. Typical antipsychotics like chlorpromazine, and atypical ones like clozapine, risperidone with different actions and side effect profiles. ECT for specific severe cases.
And crucially, the psychological side, especially CBTP. The Sensky study showing it can provide lasting benefits even for treatment-resistant cases by helping people challenge thoughts and develop coping strategies.
Exactly. Covers the main basis.
And for anyone studying this, perhaps for A-levels, getting a handle on those core concepts, the symptoms, the explanations, key studies like Freeman and Sensky, the treatments, that's really crucial. Hopefully this discussion helped clarify things.
Yeah, hopefully. And it does leave you thinking, doesn't it? Given everything we've discussed, the blend of biology, psychology, individual experience, what are the most promising paths forward, for future research? And maybe even more importantly, how can we get better at tailoring treatments, really matching them to the unique person living with schizophrenia?
That's a really powerful thought to end on. How to truly personalize care in the face of such complexity. Yeah. Something for us all to consider.